North Korea says South Korea and the U.S. will pay dearly for an annual military exercise that Pyongyang claims is a rehearsal for an attack against its regime. We have more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Monday, March 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Hours after South Korea and the U.S. began their joint training session today, North Korea launched a series of ballistic missiles into the West Sea. For more on this latest event, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Hi, great to be here.
I also have Yang Chien-Hao, a freelance journalist from Taiwan based here in Seoul. Chien-Hao, welcome back.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thomas, we will start with you. Let's begin with some details, the latest details that is, with regard to North Korea's most recent missile launch, which took place about 1:50 p.m. on this Monday afternoon, as well as, of course, its prior warning to South Korea and the U.S. regarding their joint military exercise that also began this morning.
Right. So, it's still, we don't have too much information about the latest launch. The Joint Chiefs of Staff and the military basically said they detected, several ballistic missiles being launched from Hwanghae province into the West Sea or the Yellow Sea. But that's basically it, along with just sort of the general statement of increased vigilance, working with the U.S. But clearly, we would assume North Korea hasn't said anything yet, but, we would assume it's related to the start of the Freedom Shield joint exercise, which kicked off today with the U.S. and South Korea, and that's running until the 20th. The launch today came after North Korea had made a couple of series of warnings, condemnation of the exercise, claiming, as they often do, that these joint exercises are rehearsals for an invasion, and warning that they would, likely increase feel the need to increase their own provocations in response. The KCNA news agency ran a commentary on Friday saying that, as you mentioned at the top, that the U.S. would pay dearly for this exercise. And over the weekend, the Foreign Ministry also issued a statement, again, basically condemning it as a hostile act and an invasion or a preparation for an invasion. And so then today we saw the missile launch, and this is not surprising in a sense. This is kind of par for the course of as far as North Korea's response to these exercises. The interesting twist maybe this time around is that this is now under the administration of President Trump, and so it's hard to know what's going to happen in the future in terms of the U.S. South Korea military relationship, possibly the U.S. North Korea relationship. So this is kind of standard operating, protocol for now. But, the Foreign Ministry even mentioned in their statement the kind of regime change of the U.S., but saying that, we can see that, they are still hostile to us. But, you can sense that they are aware, of course, that, there's a new regime. And so there's been some speculation that, Trump will want to, reintroduce diplomatic relations with North Korea, and I think there's some concern in South Korea and among other allies. What's the military relationship going to be like? Is the support going to be there? So, there is that context for just the start of this exercise and this latest provocation, but that's, basically where things stand at the moment.
Right, and Chien-Hao, do tell us a bit more about the Freedom Shield, this exercise that North Korea continues to condemn, and what makes the exercise so important this particular year?
So this year will be different because we could see North Korea has been strengthening the tie with Russia since last year. Even North Korea has sent troops to Russia assisting North Korea sent troops to Russia assisting the war between Russia and Ukraine, and likely to gain more military support, especially technical instruction, such as submarines, drones and reconnaissance satellites, these kind of things. So for South Korea especially, it is still the conservative holding the power now, and I think they are definitely aware of it and is trying to take more efforts to seek and strengthen their cooperation with the United States. The exercise begins today, and it has been held 25 times already, and recently it has been put into practice into comprehensive categories, including not only the traditional like land army, navy, and air force, but also on the internet and outer spaces, simulating different kinds of scenarios and try to make South Korea and the United States troops more proficient confronting any kind of possible actions that North Korea troops might take. But the problem is, before the Freedom Shield began, last week there was a big accident happen. During the joint live fire exercise in Pocheon, South Korean jets has mistakenly dropped bombs into the residential area, causing injuries, raising doubts about whether the South Korea military is really on high alert and able to handle this effectively and safely.
Right, and staying with what Chien-Hao just said, Thomas, the fate of the Freedom Shield actually just last week was uncertain following the very unfortunate accident in the city of Pocheon. Do tell us a bit about that incident and, of course, the latest on that front.
Right, so as Chien-Hao mentioned, there was the accidental dropping of bombs by a couple of Air Force KF-16 fighter jets in a sort of village area of the city of Pocheon. The latest injury toll as of today, I think, was 31. They were saying 19 civilians, 2 seriously injured, 12 soldiers. And today, the top Air Force commander had a brief, press briefing and said that, just basically apologized, accepted responsibility, said it should never happen again. That was Air Force Chief of Staff General Lee Yong-soo. And the Air Force released some data of their initial investigation into the cause of the accident. And it sounds, as if it was pilot error, which was, the initial sort of assessment. Basically seemed like something where the pilot entered the wrong coordinates, but then it was more of a problem of this kind of checklist fail-safe system where the pilot had the chance, 2 or 3 times to confirm the coordinates, and there's some breakdown of that system. And so the Defense Ministry also announced today that they're going to conduct their own really comprehensive overview of just the whole process, this kind of checklist process and, training preparation, implementation, pilot performance. So just to take a bigger picture look at it. But yeah, it's been obviously a disaster. Could have been worse, but the military has suspended live fire drills until they fully ascertain the cause of the accident. And there's it also has raised some questions among the residents there. There has been some pushback about the idea of just holding these live fire drills so close to residential areas. I mean, I think in the past there weren't as much, the city wasn't as built up around there, but it has become a fairly large settlement. I was there actually recently, last month, there was a live fire drill, and I was kind of thinking to myself, well, this is close to Pocheon, and there's actually a huge number of migrant workers are based there. And there was a spokesperson for a kind of migrant support organization today or recently in the last couple of days mentioning, also pushing back, saying they shouldn't be holding these drills. And there's something like 20,000 of the 150,000 people in Pocheon are migrant workers, and something like 6 of the injured were these workers, I think from Thailand, Nepal, and Bangladesh or somewhere. So it's become also kind of a social issue as well. The mayor of Pocheon also complained about it. And one thing I noticed in the North Korean Foreign Ministry statement, they didn't really refer directly to this, but they mentioned one stray bullet could cause a war or something, and the idea of the danger of holding live fire drills where there could be a stray accident, and it is something that gives you pause to think, if the missile landed in the wrong direction or something in North Korea, those are the kinds of things that can spark crises. So it's obviously an issue of great concern.
Right, for sure it is. Chien-Hao, also this past weekend, North Korea unveiled a nuclear-powered submarine under construction for the first time. Quite a number of pundits have been raising a bit of alarm over this. Do tell us a bit more about that.
The key point is that it might be able to carry nuclear weapons, which is really threatening. We all know that North Korea has a relatively weak power on naval facilities, and Chairman Kim Jong-un has shown he's eager to develop and improve it over the past years. Though we don't have any further details about the nuclear-powered submarine, but military expert in South Korea has indicated that it might be a 6,000 to 7,000 ton class one, which is able to carry at least 10 missiles. Also, since it's a submarine, which is underwater, if it fires the missiles, then it will not be very difficult to be detected. And that is a problem. And since North Korea is lack of capital funds, and also it has been sanctioned for over 10 or 20 years, it is really hard to believe that they can develop this only if the assistance from Russia are able to make North Korea to do so, to achieve this. But I think we still need to see and wait to see more, because it might also be just an external propaganda. Since the information about this nuclear-powered submarine is still unknown, and it is not the first time that the Pyongyang regime has announced that it has begun to build up something or already successfully developed certain items, but mostly experts has been doubting on them. And in the future, the important thing will be to investigate and gain more intelligent resources of how deep that the military aids has Russia provide to North Korea.
Right. Thomas, on the subject of warships, Mr. Trump has spoken about working with South Korea naval shipbuilding. What is the current state of America's shipbuilding capacity, and how can South Korea help, do you think?
Yeah, so this has been an issue of great concern for the Navy and sort of military brass in general for quite a while, particularly in relation to China's shipbuilding efforts. Trump mentioned in his address last week to the House of the Congress that he was starting a new office of shipbuilding within the White House, and said he was going to resurrect the industry. But it's been fairly dormant for quite a while. I think right now the U.S. has around less than 300 warships in the fleet, and the Navy wants to grow to 381 over the next 30 years, but already the number is going to drop because the Navy is planning to decommission some ships faster than they can build new ones, whereas China already has closer to something like 400 ships and has a much greater just overall shipbuilding capacity. I mean, in general, the shipbuilding industry is pretty much concentrated right here in East Asia. It's China, South Korea, and Japan have almost all of the world's shipbuilding capacity. In the U.S., I think accounts for something like 0.13% of just all shipbuilding in general. And so, right, Trump has mentioned, it's been reported that Trump mentioned it in a call with Yoon very early on in November, and he also mentioned it in a radio interview in January about possibly working with South Korea to facilitate shipbuilding. And it's something where U.S. cannot build ships on foreign soil, basically. So it would have to be either South Korea, maybe partnering or co-owning shipbuilding facilities in the U.S., or else there's also a chance to do repairs. Like, that's another area where the U.S. is really limited in just its capacity to repair its own ships. And Trump has even mentioned his pick for the Navy Secretary, John Phelan, was mentioning in his confirmation hearings how Trump calls him and complains because he sees the rust on the ships. So the U.S. is lacking even in really that capacity, and it goes back decades to sort of this era of outsourcing and globalization, and the U.S. stopped subsidizing its shipbuilding industry, and most of it came overseas, cheaper labor, cheaper facilities. So now the U.S. is really trying to play catch up, and this is an area South Korea's acting president, Choi Sang-mok, mentioned something about pursuing this avenue with the U.S. of shipbuilding cooperation, also mentioning energy cooperation, and just in general, with the sort of uncertainty of this new type of relationship with allies, or maybe returning to this more transactional type of worldview that Trump has, this could be a real card, I guess, for South Korea to play if it wants to, maintain a sort of closeness with the U.S.
Right, and amid prospects of partnership between the U.S. and South Korea naval shipbuilding, CNN last week, Chien-Hao had an interesting article about the presence of Chinese warships in, and I quote, unexpected places, which has been prompting quite a bit of concern. Tell us a bit more, including your takeaways about the report.
Okay, it is about warships from China being navigating at Australia's coastline, even made a live fire drill in the coast between Australia and New Zealand. And although this came out without any announcement in advance. Meanwhile, there has been other Chinese warships being found navigating near the ocean between Vietnam and Taiwan. And as you can see this year, China indeed has more actions. For example, sending its warships navigating over the South China Sea, which has always been a very complicated area, as numerous countries such as Taiwan, Philippines, and Vietnam, they are claiming that they have the sovereignty on certain small islands in this area. And also China has conducted military drills aiming Taiwan, and recently Taiwan's undersea cables are being cut, which is believed to be conducted by Chinese cruise ship, and now it is under investigation. And these kind of actions have become more frequent, and not only Taiwan, but also those Southeastern Asian countries, and also Australia and New Zealand. I think they need to be aware of it, and we do need to pay more attention on this kind of issues, and trying to seek cooperations to deal with this. Especially now, the public opinions are indeed in extremely divergence after we saw that arguments of President Trump and Zelensky in White House 2 weeks ago. And part of the people think that the United States will not be eager to play the role as the world police as before, only want to make deals and on the basis of gaining profits. And it will become a defense vacuum around the world, causing more troubles. But another viewpoint is that is suggesting that President Trump want to achieve the peace talks and end up the war between Ukraine and Russia in order to put more efforts dealing with China, dealing with the whole Eastern Asia. And these two debates are existing regardless of the viewpoints, strengthening the self-defense power and forming united cooperation will be the top priority.
Right. Then against such tensions between Washington and Beijing, Thomas, how do those tensions look to affect Seoul's own security interests, keeping in mind, of course, Pyongyang and its interest in weapons of mass destruction?
Right. Well, it sort of does depend on sort of what the approach from Washington will be towards Beijing. As Chien-Hao laid out the kind of two possible scenarios. On the one hand, if Washington does want to concentrate most of the efforts on containing China, then South Korea clearly could play a very important role in that, and may be able to sort of define its own position in a way that would not just be sort of following along, but perhaps influencing the discussion. But South Korea. If Seoul does work closely with Washington, I mean, the areas that could be open are, again, this idea of the shipbuilding alliance. I mean, that's an area of great value potentially to the U.S. in terms of its competition with China in particular. And, there are areas like supply chain resilience. South Korea's obviously got an important semiconductor industry that plays into that. Tech. AI assistance, there are things that China and the U.S. are kind of on a collision course or on a competition course with. And South Korea has a lot of strengths in those areas that could certainly work, in alignment with the U.S. in terms of, building up the value of that alliance. But at the same time, we've seen as well this concern among U.S. allies around Europe. Even Canada is facing tariffs, where we know Trump has already spoken in the past about, feeling like there's unfair tariffs with South Korea, which is not really the case, but also he's complained about, the paying too much for keeping U.S. troops here, and we know there's a trade surplus with South Korea and the U.S., and that's something that Trump likes to target, as well as if Trump decides he wants to really re-engage with North Korea and maybe find some kind of a peace deal, again, a la what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, it could be a case where, how much is he willing to sort of give up on the U.S. side in order to secure a deal. So I think South Korea, obviously wants to continue to, the relationship with Washington, but, I think the question underlying it is how much do you try to placate or go along, and how much do you have to start looking at your own independent path, which is, the question that's happening in Europe, where, and South Korea does have a large standing army, has defense, its own defense industry, so South Korea does have capacity in those regards, and I think the question of whether South Korea should arm itself with nuclear weapons will come up at some point as well. So, I think it's really a question, it's really hard to know which direction this is going to go.
Right. It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because that's one of the topics we'll be discussing this coming Thursday, actually. Chien-Hao, so amid the uncertainty, if I may, over Washington's reliability as an ally under the new Trump administration, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently claimed that Mr. Trump is certain China will not make a move on Taiwan while he is in office, and I'm quoting. Now, speaking within your capacity as a Taiwanese journalist, what are your takeaways from this remark?
Remember, last year we've discussed about this in in Taiwan, the mainstream prediction or forecast for China's invasion. It might be happen around 2027, which is the 100th anniversary establishment of the People's Liberation Army, and also it will be the new beginning of the new term of President Xi in China. And 2 days ago, you just mentioned, during the interview with CNBC, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has paraphrased President Trump's words, saying that he is very confident that China will not invade Taiwan during his term. And for us, I think the time, whether it is 2027 or later, it is not important anymore. To deal with that is meaningless now. Like what I've just mentioned, that the risk and the frequency of China's provocation, of China's action is rising. And Taiwan must strengthen its power, its self-defense ability to make sure that it is costly for Beijing to take us away. And we are at least have the determination to fight for our country first, and then make the United States believe that Taiwan won't give up itself, and it will be effective and valuable for Washington to assist and protect Taiwan. And also convincing the United States and other countries to build up a united awareness toward Beijing is such an important part, because as you know, that's we just talked about last year, 60% of the semiconductor foundry is from Taiwan, and Apple, Google, and NVIDIA, they are all the main customers of TSMC. If China invades Taiwan, once the production line is being interrupted, it will definitely trigger the huge disaster to the United States and world's economy. And if more people and more countries know that how severe it will be, then we do need to think about and need to prevent it from happening.
Right, for sure. Meanwhile, Thomas, back here in this part of the world, we have about a minute left. You mentioned South Korea and the possibility of it possessing nuclear weapons going forward. Do you expect any progress, perhaps, on efforts to rid North Korea of its nuclear weapons under the current Trump administration?
That's still the stated goal from Washington, although they actually changed the language to say no longer denuclearization of Korean Peninsula, but denuclearization of North Korea. I find it a hard thing to picture, seeing how far North Korea has gotten with its own, its nuclear program, and considering how the rest of the world is looking at, I think, nuclear weapons in general. And I think they're having a sort of resurgence in the sense of importance, especially with questions around the reliability, perhaps, of the U.S. as a partner, providing a nuclear umbrella. So I think, if there is a debate or a diplomacy with North Korea, I could see perhaps, them halting further production or something, but it's hard to imagine giving up their arsenal entirely. Whereas at the same time, I think the pressure or the conversation within South Korea is going to continue to grow about whether South Korea should actually arm itself with nuclear weapons.
Right, indeed, that is a conversation that is looking to take place even more. It's something we'll be discussing this coming Thursday, as I mentioned earlier. All right, Thomas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Chien-Hao, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching, and be sure to join us again same time tomorrow.